Oi oi, we said it'd be a good one, and it was a good one. In fact, it was a very good one. I was considering bringing back star ratings this week, and I think I had about 4 to 4.5 star performances on this card. Maybe bring them back. I don't know. But yeah, UFC 238 was actually really good, and we said it was going to be really good, and it was really good. So yeah, it's always nice when these ones live up to expectations. And obviously, Tony Ferguson versus Donald Cerrone did live up to expectations the most, except it ended a little bit early, so we're going to get into the controversy of that. Obviously, Henry Cejudo did an incredible job. Maybe my fight of the night. Actually, no. Ferguson versus. I've got about 3 fight of the nights on my list here. Some good stuff from the women. My boy Eddie Wineland was fantastic, and of course, we've got to talk at some length about Valentina Shevchenko and that just whooping she put on Jessica Eye. But we'll get into that later. Not really any news this week. Really, the only news this week was that, I think as the event was going, Chris Weidman said that he was going up to light heavyweight, and the reaction of the MMA world was just like, oh good, finally, because everyone's been asking you to for ages, you've been saying you would for ages, except you keep coming back at middleweight, doing amazingly, and then losing. I think that's interesting. I think it'd be interesting to see how he fits in at light heavyweight, because obviously with Anthony Smith and Thiago Santos showing that division is just ripe for the picking, neither of those men you would consider generally as skilled as Weidman. Probably a bit more durable at this stage, but certainly interesting. I can think of some interesting... can I? There's not really any interesting matchups for anyone up there because there's no one there. But really what everyone is saying is like, if you're going to light heavyweight, can you get to John Jones? That's all that really matters. And he probably can, to be honest. Redo Luke Rockhold versus Chris Weidman at light heavyweight, with both of them looking a little bit fuller and plumper. Oh, and Demetrius Johnson announced his next opponent, and they announced Eddie Alvarez's next opponent, actually. It's Edward Furlong, who I love. I was writing about him when I wrote the Martin Nguyen study a few weeks ago for the Patreon boys. Very interesting character, very interesting style, big lightweight, lots and lots of spinning kicks. I mean, not as slick a boxer, and the spinning kicks, like, if you can time them, you've got a good chance of countering him, like Nguyen did, took his head off going down the side of his kick. Good takedown defense, but not infallible takedown defense. So, I mean, it's a good matchup. I think Eddie can do well here, but I also, it's a hard matchup. It's not some kind of tune-up or anything. I think the way that it's working is that they've got this tournament going on with Nastyukin having knocked him out. Nastyukin! And obviously Fuliang not in the tournament, so he's around and he's one of their big names that they can put Eddie in with. You say, oh, that's a hard match, and half the internet is like, good, he deserves hard matches. What's all this conspiracy theory stuff about? And he's just like, no, I just meant that's a hard match. A lot of people don't know Edward Fuliang, and he's good. So that'll be fun. And Demetrius Johnson's is apparently fighting Tatsumitsu Wada, who lost in January, and then again a few months earlier in 2018. Oh, that's a hard sell. Okay. So this is where Demetrius Johnson is. Like, let's stop pretending that. I mean, you could have the second Cejudo fight, but Cejudo has since gone on and done more than DJ did. So let's get over that. I think, while we're talking about DJ and Cejudo, I think the thing is that annoys me, really, is that people who are clinging to DJ getting the win in the second fight are doing so rather disingenuously. Some people say, like, he doesn't have anyone left to challenge him at flyweight. He left having lost that fight. It was a good, close fight. The thing is, like, if we're arguing over 1 point or 2 points or whatever, I think you struggle to argue 2 points, but if you're arguing 1 point either way, that tells you that it was a very close fight, and that DJ now actually has a rival. And that if the whole thing has been like, oh, the UFC don't promote him, they don't give him the attention, it's quite hard. I mean, they're doing it with Valentina and John Jones now, but it's quite hard to put attention on you if there's no one there to elevate you in some sort of rivalry. We remember Muhammad Ali for the Joe Frazier fights and George Foreman, not so much for sparking Zora Foley and people like that. You need someone to push you like that, to really, get people interested. And he actually found that. Henry Cejudo was making him work, giving him a really hard fight, and Now he's left. That would have been the rubber match, especially now. The rubber match would be like, yeah, okay, that's must-watch TV. If DJ wins here, that's incredible. If Cejudo wins there, that's incredible. There are stakes. It's a rubber match, 1-on-1. One guy's trying to prove that it wasn't really a win in the second fight. The other guy's trying to prove that it is. That's the best flyweight fight you could make in the world, anywhere right now, with the exception of Koji versus anyone. But to pretend that, like, the UFC stiffed him by not promoting him, and that he had no one left to fight, is just bizarre. Especially when you see who they just matched him against now. I mean, I'm not going to shit too much on Takemitsu Wada, because I don't know much about him. And the last guy that DJ fought was surprisingly good, despite not being very well known, and coming off a loss. So, we'll wait. We'll wait and see. Point is, Henry Cejudo is where it's at. Now, let's get into the Henry Cejudo show that was this card. So, Caitlin Chukagian versus Chukagian. Fuck, I can't say her name. I couldn't last time. I can't say it this time. This is Joanne Calderwood. Calderwood comes out, immediately gets to work with the lead leg kicking game, which is her specialty. Going to the inside leg, going high with it. Thought she looked very good there. Jab looked decent. Very square, as DC pointed out, but that's her game, her high stance sort of thing. Like, she'll sometimes throw the inside kick, and then as the opponent surges in, she'll pick up the knee and just use it as like a barrier. She did it to Andrade, which is impressive because Andrade is a tank, and she would normally just run through someone putting their knee up to stop her. But she did it here against Chukagian too. Chukagian was ki-eyeing on every fucking punch. And there were several fights like this with the women ki-eyeing on every punch, and it really got on my tits. And it works on judges, which is even sadder. So, awful. But lots of weird hook kicks and things, spamming hands, throwing stuff at air. And then in the second round, she finally starts landing some blows to the head. And in the third round, she's landing some more, and Calderwood's not really doing anything about it. The outside low kick was working great for Chukagian, but she didn't really do it much. Calderwood's inside low kick was landing very much with the foot on a lot of them. But, a little bit of groundwork, a couple of takedowns. Joanne got her down in the first round, and I can't remember if it was the third round. But anyway, it's sad because, Calderwood loses this fight, and knowing her track record, she'll probably change camp again and be like, I've got to change everything. And it's going really well. She's been looking good. So you'd be like, just stay there. Chukagian, I mean, that's a good win for her. Is she only 12-2? I would have thought she'd lost more. I watched her against I earlier in the week, and that was dreadful. But that's a Jessica I fight in a nutshell. My boy, Fast Eddie Wineland, fought Grigory Popov. And Grigory Popov was definitely not what I expected from Grigory Popov. I was expecting a very white dude, and he looks like a Thai. It's a... obviously, Russia is a huge and enormous number of ethnic groups there, but just not what I was expecting. And he was sort of a Muay Thai styley kind of guy too. Wineland comes out doing his usual feints, his wide boy stance, just being thick and going at this guy. Lots of feints, always leading with the right hand, very little jabbing. Lands 2 jabs back to back later on after he's been hurt, and you're like, Wineland, throw some more jabs, please. But really, it's just right hand to the body, right hand to the body, right hand to the head. Stuns Popov. And that was just the pattern he went through over and over again. You're like, well, Eddie, please throw some combinations, throw some jabs. You do fantastically. But he's just looking for the right hand constantly. Second round starts. Popov chins him with either a left hook or a short left elbow. I can't remember what it was, but Wineland's feet gave out a little bit. And then Popov's trying to move in on him, and Wineland throws like a 4-punch combination, rattles his head around, and starts following up for the finish. Snaps him down, gets a almost guillotine with the bicep grip, so power guillotine, ninja choke, whatever you want to call it, but then gets back up and knocks him out with the right hand. Really, good return to form for Eddie Wineland, but looking very limited in what he did, I thought. It was just the right hand over and over again. And when he jabbed, it landed, so you're like, why not just do more of that? And Popov, if you can't say anything else for him, you can say that he's tough, because he was brought in here, with a leg kick TKO in his last fight, Gogo Plata submission in the one before it, with opponents' combined record of 30 and 35. And even without looking at the opponent's records, you're going down that record going, low kick TKO, Gogo Plata. Yeah, no, that's not going to happen in the UFC, mate. It just, it doesn't. With the very rare low kick TKO, but even Edson Barbosa and Justin Gaethje, once they fight good people, they aren't TKOing them with leg kicks. They're low kicking them, maybe hobbling them and then finishing them with punches or whatever. Darren Stewart versus Bevon Lewis. This was two black explosive guys who then decided to lean on each other. Good low kicks from Darren Stewart. I think that's pretty much what won it for him. Good low kick. But quite a dull fight before that. Because I enjoyed Bevon Lewis in the fight with Uriah Hall. I remember where I saw him before, and I thought he did decent work in that. But yeah, this was a really slow one. Xiaonan Yan versus Angela Hill. It was not Xiaonan Yan I was thinking of. It was that other girl, Wei Li something or other. But Xiaonan Yan looked tanky. She was a thick lass and throwing heavy punches, and Angela Hill was trying to clip off counters. I thought it was a really entertaining little matchup of styles here. You know, Xiaonan Yan was working in the longer combinations. Angela Hill was trying to counter those combinations, and it was working a lot of the time, but she'd like clip off 2 counters and then move out the side, and Xiaonan Yan would just continue her combination through like 5 strikes. Hill scored a good right hand. I think it was coming out of the clinch in the 3rd round. But, you know, Angela Hill, her thing is, aside from the funky movement and the cool stepping off to the side stuff, and a good intercepting knee, her money punch is the overhand, right? She really does well when she times it over the jab, the cross counter. So she lands it here, and then she just sort of like went back to it over and over again. And I think that's the difficulty. Like, if you've got a really good right hand, and you're sailing it in across the top of people's jabs, and then they start like turning their shoulder up with their jab, they start ducking down after their jab, they stop committing to their jab as much. You know, we talked about Joe Gans the other week, but you have to have stuff to make people think about, you know, I think the cross counter works best when it is sort of like a sidearm. You know, you're going at them with your jab or your right hand to the body or whatever, and then when they throw back at you or when you duck in to hit their body and then you sail the overhand across the top, that's when you catch them. You know, I feel like waiting on people to try and land that counter is where you get into sort of like a rhythm. And it's the same thing with the Eddie Wineland fight. You know, if you get into a rhythm, so much of being able to take a punch is seeing the punch coming and registering it. You know, if you covered someone's eyes and punched them in the face, they'd probably go unconscious or you're going to hurt their jaw. But just seeing a punch coming, you're going to do a load of stuff that maybe you're not even in control of to deal with the punch. It's always the ones people can't see that hurt him. You know, Lineker versus Dodson is a great example. Closed his eyes up. Suddenly, John Lineker's getting rocked by John Dodson, who really has just been sort of arm punching for most of the fight. And John Lineker's got a head like a cinder block. And that's the same way that the combinations work too. You know, like, another great example of this is like Junior Dos Santos versus Shane Carwin. He's hitting him with 1s and 2s the whole fight. 1 punch, 1 punch, 1 punch, and then he throws 1, 2, 3, and 4. And Carwin's coming back at him because he's in the rhythm of just taking a couple of punches on his guard or whatever and then coming back. And Carwin's coming back at him, gets clipped with a short left hook as he's coming back, and that's the one that hurts him, this huge, monstrous dude who's not been hurt up to that point. Rhythm manipulation, you know, it's not just about people recognizing stuff and defending it or countering it. It's about, you know, even the subconscious layer of recognition that keeps, you know, grits you through punches. So I think, you know, I talk about Angie a lot because I quite enjoy her style, but I think she needs some more, because when she popped her jab, it worked well against Xiaonan Yan. And the triangle in the first round was really good. Actually, we didn't talk about that, but it was a close triangle. She had the back of the back of the hand in, which is like, you know, if you get caught in one of those in training, you're just like, oh well, how long's on the clock? But I think if Angela Hill found a way to leverage the jab more, the inside low kick, you know, I have said before that I don't quite like that as much as her outside low kick because it allows you to keep that leg back. But I think that would be interesting to see. And in fact, on the subject of cross counters, we're going to get onto Alexa Grasso later. There was some good women's boxing on it. In fact, there was some good women's striking on this card, which, as a giant sexist, was hard for me to swallow, but I enjoyed watching it nonetheless. Kelvin Cato versus Ricardo Lamas. Fuck, this was the first one I watched out of the lot, and I'm struggling to remember a lot of it. But the finishing combination was so similar to the Burgos fight. It's just like feinty feint and then actual 1-2 on the end of a little step. He steps and then steps again and catches you just on the end, you know, thinking you're in safe distance. So Ricardo Lamas suffers a KO loss. Very sad because he's one of my boys, or he has become one of my boys over recent years. But he was doing well, and again, we said the low kicks would work, and they work quite well. Cato doing better, taking his leg out of the way of low kicks. But again, Moicano was catching him with counter low kicks and things. And, you know, there's a difference between someone throwing low kicks at you and you dealing with them, and having taken a bad low kick and then having to deal with low kicks. You know, once you've taken the bad one, that's a little bit of your movement taken away. That's a little bit of your ability to check comfortably taken away. You know, being at 100% and cognizant of the low kicks is way better than taking a hard low kick and then starting to work dealing with the low kicks. Alexa Grasso versus Karolina Kowalkiewicz. I thought Grasso looked fantastic here. Not like in appearance because she was wearing one of those fucking wife beaters. They can't get the women's uniform right. I mean, Reebok kept claiming, like, do you remember when they had Ronda Rousey on stage saying, I actually wear 2 bras because I'm so worried about my boob popping out. And you go, fair enough, actually, that would be pretty embarrassing on a stage like this. But every fight, someone is, like, if you wear the short one, people take a kick and then they have to adjust it to put their boob back in. If you wear the wife beater, you know, that's just flappy and not really, like, athletic wear at all. And then Carla Esparza still somehow wrangles wearing her dad's swimming t-shirt in a fight. And it's just, you know, it's so different having like a big floppy piece of cloth in the way of every grappling exchange. So yeah, not a huge fan of those, but they just need to work out the uniform generally. But you know, Reebok is doing this at like the bare minimum. They're the lowest bidder. They don't want to do jack shit to improve the uniforms. But in this fight, yeah, you know, it was Grasso moving, circling, using nice V-steps, going in and then out the side door, turning Karolina, and coming across the top of the jab with the right hand. Karolina doing the striking that we said she'd do, where she has a turning circle like a barge, just sort of following her behind her face, chin up in the air. I mean, she takes a fantastic shot, but you're fighting like a brawler and you're not a huge hitter and you're not getting in enough. And Alexa Grasso just pieced her up for 3 rounds. Actually, on the subject of turning people, Jessica Eye, Valentina Shevchenko in the co-main event, obviously a huge part of that. Well, we'll get into that later. You know, stick around. We'll talk about that after we've done some of these lesser fights, because I've got to give an honest assessment and tell you what I really saw in that fight. There was a little bit of clinch work where Karolina was able to get off a couple of knees and things like that, but Alexa Grasso actually did a good job of turning Karolina onto the fence and doing things like that, because that's one of the things we talked about. Alexa Grasso has a bad habit of letting herself be put on the fence or backing herself onto the fence. So maybe she's, you know, clearly she's been working on her boxing more, or, you know, this fight obviously helped her showcase her boxing. We were talking about this last week. The fight against Inoue, she looked fantastic in that, and then she starts fighting people where she doesn't get the opportunity to show that off as much. Can we have her exclusively against one-dimensional strikers, please? No, but I think, you know, clearly she'd been working on her footwork a good deal for this fight, and I think that's, you know, there's a lot of worrying about the takedown and being like, I will double my time invested in wrestling. But the first layer of defense in wrestling and in striking is where you are, where your feet are, where you're moving. You know, the distance you put between yourself and your opponent, and then the distance you put between yourself and the fence. Because as we're going to talk about with Tatiana Suarez, you know, if they can just drive through you onto the fence, you're not really going to be able to counter wrestle them that well. Aldo versus Pedro Muoz. I managed to skip this one somehow in my pre-fight, but I was super hyped for this. Pedro Muoz, coming off that win over Cody Garbrandt, where he really surprised me, because I used to joke, and I'm still going to joke, because in this fight he did exactly the same thing, that he is the bantamweight for people who say that bantamweight is too fast, because he's a slow man for bantamweight. But he's powerful, and he's got a ridiculous squeeze and a guillotine. So it was interesting seeing him here, because I've seen Aldo quite a lot in the past, and I thought that he's had very flappy hands. The Jimmie Rivera fight I watched a little while ago to get ready for this event, and I was surprised pleasantly about how well he was doing with his kicks and his movement and stuff. But Aldo's hands looked really quite good here, I thought, and combined with the rest of his game. Muoz, you know, when you watched him against Cody Garbrandt, what I loved about that Garbrandt fight, and I was going to do something short on it for like maybe, can you do a Filthy Casuals guide to one fight? I don't know, I've invented them, so maybe I will. But I was going to talk about how Cody Garbrandt is very, very fast, and he has very, very fast hands, and what Pedro Muoz did very well in that fight was to counter the step and not focus on Garbrandt's hands. So he'd make a little bit distance, Garbrandt would suddenly run in or step to punch, and he'd go with the foot and he'd just duck his head and swing the overhand, and that's how he hurt him a couple of times. But in this fight, Aldo did a fantastic job controlling the where the fight took place, moving laterally around the cage, kicking and moving laterally. You know, that's the John Jones formula for victory. You know, if you've got good kicks, you can keep the opponent out of range and circle so that they can't close you onto the fence, and you can stop a shot out in the open, you're in pretty good condition to do whatever you need to do. But his hands were looking good at this one, and they were going off his legs well. You know, he'd pick up the knee to throw the kick and not throw the kick, step in and throw the right hand or the left hand afterwards. Really nice stuff. Head movement looked great. I mean, there were moments where Pedro Muoz moved into the cage and then swung punches at him and Aldo would just slip out of the way. I thought he looked really, really good. I was very surprised that this is the same lad that I was going like, flappy fucking hands on Aldo. But, just a reminder that people do improve, and especially if you take your eyes off them for 1 or 2 fights, they'll come back and they'll really surprise you. Tatiana Suarez versus Nina Ansaroff. Ansaroff obviously on a very good run up to this point, and Tatiana Suarez fresh off just strangling Alexa Grasso with almost no resistance. But this was an amazing advert for Tatiana Suarez, because, we've been told what a great wrestler she is. She's been doing incredible things in the cage, and then Nina Ansaroff, fresh off beating Claudia Gadelha. If you're talking about a smothering takedown artist in MMA or in women's strawweight, Claudia Gadelha is one of your go-tos, or certainly was in the past. But to come off that successful performance and just get woman-handled by Tatiana Suarez, incredible. I mean, she sprawled. I think this is just how tenacious and also technically skilled Suarez is proving to be. There was a beautiful sprawl in, I think it was the second round. Suarez goes for a single. Ansaroff sprawls on it perfectly, and it was like Johnson versus Habib, where they just worked their way back up, pushing all the way through straight onto the fence. And it was from a good few feet away, too. She was just like, nope, we're still going, drive through, drive them up out of the sprawl, up onto their feet along the fence, and then start working from there. I mean, Ansaroff held herself up quite well on the fence at certain points, for long periods of the fight. But if you're not able to work effectively from there, you're just, it's kind of a boring part of the fight, the fight game generally, that bit where you are defending the takedowns but you can't break free and you aren't punishing people. I mean, the elbow that should be illegal but isn't, almost 12-6, has changed that a little bit for strikers. If you're good at landing that and you keep looking for it, it's a good way of not just the chance of a knockout or hurting them while they're on your leg. It's a good way of making them move and making stuff happen, because half of defending a single or a double along the fence is being able to move their head to one side or the other. If you can get them to move their head for you, that's always good. But yeah, I mean, not a finish, not like a huge statement. You're gonna have trouble selling people on her title challenge with highlights from her fights, but very impressive if you know what you're watching. Then we're getting into the main card now. So it started with Blagoy Ivanov versus Tai Tuivasa, and I left this one off because I was like, okay, well, I'll watch that after I've done all the rest. And I went back to mop it up, and good lord, I mean, I wrote a little post-fight piece for you guys, and I just focused on some of the cool things I saw on the main card, and I described this as the most heavyweight fight. It's just, guys gassing out in the first round. Tai Tuivasa got caught with the same thing he got caught with by JDS, surged in on him on the fence, led with his face, got caught with a counter hook. And Blagoy Ivanov was southpaw, didn't do anything to check his lead hand. Tuivasa's lead hand didn't come up to guard him as he dived in behind his right hand, so he gets hit with his check hook, which is really just like a forearm to the side of the head, and gets dropped in the first round. Lots of that Tuivasa getting the double underhooks along the fence, putting his head in front of the opponents, post his head underneath, and come out with elbows. Couldn't really get the distance to do that effectively. If you watch him do it against guys like Jared Coulter, just murdered him with it, but Blagoy Ivanov a little bit better as a grappler and a wrestler. Ultimately, a very boring fight, which Blagoy Ivanov won by decision. Now, Petr Yan versus Jimmie Rivera. This is where we're getting into the magic portion of the card. In fact, I think the top four, it just was brilliant. So if you sat through Tai Tuivasa and Blagoy Ivanov, you got what you deserved. You got a big thank you from the fights. Petr Yan versus Jimmie Rivera. I was really interested to see how this one goes, because Jimmie Rivera can do the dancey kickboxing. Petr Yan stops people doing the dancey kickboxing. So I was saying Jimmie Rivera is going to have to show us some stuff to prevent that happening. And he showed us all the stuff. For the first round, it was direction changes beautifully along the fence. So you saw Yan swinging left hooks and things, and Rivera he'd go one way, duck back through underneath the punch and get away scot-free. He was tying up, so if Yan moved in, he'd grab a clinch and turn Yan onto the fence and then free himself. And then he was just firing back. Firing back is like the least preferable in order of things, because the opponent's putting you on the fence to try and panic you and get you firing back. But if you're doing all the right things too, and then you just throw back when they're moving in on you once, you can really surprise them. So there were points in this first round where Petr Yan was like, and sort of lost track of his pressure. And to be fair, I was talking about this in the last podcast. I was saying Petr Yan missed the pressure, but every time I watch a first round of a Petr Yan fight, I go, needs to get to work with the pressure soon, otherwise he's not going to tire this guy out. And then he does. You know, he comes out for the second round and just murders them. Towards the end of the first round, I mean, there was a couple of little bits I picked up on, which I put in my Patreon boy recap. But the shifting left hook, which was, that is Kyoji Horiguchi's money. That's how he earns his paycheck. He bursts in with the 1-2 from long distance, and then steps out the side door and weaves his head under the opponent's lead shoulder line to avoid whatever punch is coming back, and lets the left hook follow him out. And you can really crack people with that. He cracked a load of people in the UFC and Ryzen with that. And TJ Dillashaw caught Renan Barão with that in their second fight. That was the start of the ending combination, the beginning of the end. And it was this combination that Yan managed to knock Rivera down with. Second round, Rivera moves well, lands some low kicks out in the open because he's able to get off the fence and fight in the open for a bit. The low low-kick hurts Yan. He changes stance, low kick onto the shin. Those are the ones that, I cringe watching them. Because it's one thing to kick someone in the back of the leg, the lower leg. That's great. But if you kick them shin to shin, But Yan is clearly hurting. You know, those kicks, we're always talking about it now because it is just such a strange phenomenon. They do shut your leg down for a little while, and then suddenly it'll come back. So he switched stances to get his leg back underneath him, and Rivera was punting the other leg instead. And then Rivera just got sort of in the habit of throwing the kick over and over again. It got sort of tunnel vision on it, and Yan did the right thing, which is just to pull your foot back into your stance and then set back into your stance again. Withdraw the leg from the kick rather than trying to pick it up and check. While I was watching this, I was thinking, with the advent of the low kick, the Superman punch could really become a force again, but I think guys are quite reluctant to use it. You know, it's sort of seen as like a gimmicky move. Who was it? Oh, James Irving. Or Irvin. Julius Irvin? No, James Irvin, the guy who Anderson Silva smoked in like one punch. But his career was largely Superman punches. You know, he'd come out, he'd throw like one hard low kick at the leg, and then he'd do a Superman punch. Knocked out Thiago Silva like that, actually. But it's seen as kind of gimmicky. I suppose it's a jumping move, but if you're the naked low kick isn't so much a thing anymore. You can't just kick a dude in the thigh. They'll pick it up, or they'll just take it and counter you, you know? Whereas the low kick means that the naked low kick is back on the table. You can lead with that, which makes the Superman punch more viable. Plus, the answer to the low kick is to pull the leg back underneath you. So you're taking yourself out of sort of striking position. If you get hit hard by like a Superman punch with both feet underneath you, that's much worse than getting hit when you're in your stance. And I was looking at this particular moment going, if he Superman punched him right now, you know, even if you're not big on the Superman punch, it's a great way to enter and start, you know, follow up with combinations. And it's not so much gimmicky because, you know, I would say in terms of gimmickiness, the Superman jab is even more gimmicky because, you know, you're probably not going to knock anyone out. But it's been a major part of GSP's game. You know, he built it into a scientific striking system where one thing set up the next, and the Superman punch was a believable part of that. You know, people fell for the inside low kick, and he'd jump up the center with the Superman punch and run into another low kick. Lovely uppercut third round, knocks Rivera down. I mean, the thing about Yan is that he's just so good at reading people and adapting. You know, it's not just pressure fighting, it's pressure fighting and also a really clever scientific striker. I'm so excited for this guy going forward. And the weird thing about this is that I was watching dudes after this talking about the Henry Cejudo win. No one wants to give Henry Cejudo any credit, by the way. But there were some people being like, the bantamweight division isn't what it used to be, you know, with like Faber and I think they said Jorgensen too. I was like, what the fuck? But I think, are you watching this card? You know, you got Aljo's looking great. Pedro Munoz is a very strong fight. They listed Cody in their thing, and Pedro Munoz just beat Cody. Petr Yan and Jimmie Rivera, both fantastic fighters. You got Rafael Assunção, who's licking his wounds somewhere from that Moraes fight. And then you got Cejudo and Marlon Moraes in the main event. You know, this division is fire, and I don't know why people would sleep on it. There was also a really nice moment where Yan, it was one of the first ones that he managed to land, where he held the right hand out to check Rivera's lead hand, and then he came in behind a jab and then a left hook, and as he left hooked, he stepped with his right foot so that he could throw the left kick after left hook. Fantastic combination, body kick especially, Cub Swanson special. And there were a couple of nice body kicks in this one. The thing about Yan's body kicks is that he sets them up very cleverly. They're not like perfect kickboxing kicks or Thai boxing kicks. But he does, he lands them, and that's the important part. Well, I mean, on the subject of the body kicks, the co-main event, the ones that Valentina was turning Jessica Eye onto were, well, we'll get into that in a second, but Tony Ferguson versus Donald Cerrone, that's the important part now. This was the one I was super hyped for. I'm sure it's the one you were super hyped for. It won Fight of the Night because everyone was super hyped for it. But just brilliant. I mean, I wrote a Patreon preview for the Patreon boys, and then I think I previewed it on the podcast as well for the people who aren't Patreon boys. But one of the things that I talked about, and this is something that's been bugging me for a few years, like I'll say, people who want to get in on Donald Cerrone should low kick Donald Cerrone because they don't have to pick up his feet to check, or you can stand him still if he's trying to move. And people are like, you can't low kick with Donald Cerrone. Kick with a kicker. That's madness, Jack. And the thing is that, like, if you're doing the right things, kicking with someone doesn't mean like standing there and trading kicks with them. It means using kicks to do something. And if you're moving them backwards the entire time, you've got a much better chance of getting your kicks off than them. And lo and behold, Tony Ferguson's stumpy, angry-ass kicks land with incredible frequency. Donald Cerrone can barely get his leg up to kick before being punched in the face. Pressure keeps people from kicking. If you keep moving them backwards, it's whenever you say it's hard to kick moving backwards, people get mad and go, you can kick moving backwards, you just slide back, and they give you like an example of it. The thing is, if someone is constantly moving into your space and space to hit you, you can't just go up on one leg comfortably and do that. It's a lot more dangerous when someone's pressuring you, which is why even very good kickers don't do it. So Tony walks forward, just stamping on Cerrone's gut. I thought this was a brilliant performance. It's always a brilliant performance from Tony, but what I got from this was that the weird things that he does are now becoming even more of like his sort of science. Where before it was like, I'll do a crazy spin now. I'll try spinning, that's a good trick. But before it was like that, I'll just do it on a whim. Now it's part of his game. If you watch, like, he throws maybe a right jab, or a southpaw right jab, or he'll throw the right hand and step through. And in the same way that like Eddie Alvarez and Dominic Cruz use the dart, he'll turn his back. He'll just go past the opponent with his punch, turn his back, they'll move in to like hug his back, and he'll hit him with an elbow or something. And then every time that he turned back to face Donald Cerrone from one of these turns, his head was underneath Cerrone's, posted on it, so that Cerrone couldn't get a clinch, like a proper clinch. He probably could have got a collar tie or something like that. But I was really impressed. Like, he's doing this backspinning stuff, but he's completely aware of what he's doing. It's not just... It's kind of like, when I was learning to back kick and things like that, I had to learn to spot, and I didn't like doing it, so I just sort of kick behind me. I suppose that's the difference between a back kick and turning side kick. One's much more behind you, and one is turning and then looking at the opponent and doing the side kick. But it's about knowing what's going on behind you, and Tony's actually pretty good, even when he's not looking, at knowing what's going on behind him, if the opponent's bumped into him or trying to grab him around the waist or whatever. And then, like, 3 times in succession, he hit him with the back elbow. And he did it in a way that was like, we're always talking about the jab and duck, and how leading to get on the counter is the highest form of counter striking. And Tony pops Cerrone with the jab, immediately ducks in case of a counter, and then as Cerrone swings over his head, he turns into the back elbow and hits him in the face. Fantastic stuff. There were so many nice feints from Tony in this fight, shoulder feints to get Cowboy moving, and then something else. There was in the very first round, he throws a long kick at Cerrone's calf, falls short, brings his foot back to him so he's standing on top of both of his feet. And you're like, okay, well, now he's going to reposition himself back in stance, which is what a normal person would do. So Cerrone's moving back into range, and he springs forward from both feet underneath him to jab Cerrone in the face. Just the weirdest rhythm and from the weirdest position. And there's just so many things like that in Eddie Ferguson fight. And we talked about how Cerrone might do well using more traditional, like, kickboxing, well, more traditional Thai counters to kicks, dragging them across the body and doing things like that. It was Ferguson catching Cerrone's kicks when he kicked. So that was pretty cool too. Obviously, the controversial bit is going to be the finish. From the looks of things, the punch didn't land on the eye, and the nose was already in bad shape. And, people were saying, do you think Cerrone was looking for a way out of there? I think we're all agreed Cerrone was getting his ass kicked there. He was not... I mean, he was in the fight as far as he was in the fight, but Donald Cerrone isn't like a big turnaround man, typically. And he hates pressure, and he tends to collapse under it. but he was still there. So, you can see how he would feel annoyed about that. And I don't think he was looking for a way out, because they showed the replay of him blowing his nose and then going, "What the fuck?" about his eye. Gross out moment of the night. Donald Cerrone putting both fingers into his eye to try and forcibly open his eyelids. Just rank. But very unfortunate. This is the thing, that it's just one of those tidbits that always comes up whenever someone gets a bad nose break or a badly banged up nose. Don't blow your nose. And he did. And yeah, it was awful. The punch after the bell, obviously not great. Big John, well, I know someone was showing Big John's previous tweet about how the bell is the signal for the referee. Like your teacher used to say, that bell is a signal to me, not to you. And he said it's the referee's job to get people apart. And in fairness, when you're letting guys like Matt Hamill fight, Matt Hamill literally can't hear the bell. It's not his job to stop. He stops when the referee stops him. And referees were always much closer in the Matt Hamill fights, ready to stop him. Problem was, and we were talking about this the other week, we were talking about referee position and how a good, Mills Lane was really good at staying close to the action, moving athletically. Dan Miragliotta was on the other side of the cage, pacing across himself. And it meant that he couldn't get there in time to stop the contest when the bell went. Big Dan been around for a lot of things, done a lot of good, done a few big public fuck-ups, but he was miles away from this, and he said stop, and then his feet stop when he says stop. He doesn't get between the fighters, and then he shouts to Tony, "I told you to stop." Yeah, tricky stuff, but now they're talking, well, there was rumours of a rematch. I think it was Rogan saying that they were talking about a rematch, and this was like the same week that Rogan was like, Francis Ngannou versus Andy Ruiz is the fight people want to see. And you're like, no, they don't. Where are you getting this from, Joe? Who are these people you're talking to? What's happening is that Joe's saying it, and then Brendan Schaub's going, "Oh, for sure, 100%. I can't see the point in the rematch. I mean, yes, this is the closest Donald Cerrone's. Well, no, he had a title shot. This is very close to the best little run of Donald Cerrone's career. Beaten Al Iaquinta, who was sort of ranked in the position that you wouldn't expect Cerrone to beat him. He's always fallen at the elite of the elite, and that's where Al was ranked for whatever reason. But Cerrone fights so often, they could just have him fight the loser of Khabib versus Poirier while Tony has a title shot. They could have him fight Conor McGregor, put that on a main event, which you absolutely could, and we all know you could. Cowboy could do anything in the meantime. Donald Cerrone, Tony Ferguson has been held up so long now, and it's not things in his, it's not all out of his control. Some of them were injuries, things like that. It's not the UFC just stiffing him, but at this point, it is not good that he hasn't fought for the actual belt yet. He could be the champion. He was the interim champion. He hasn't lost. Him and Khabib have had similar length layoffs. It's not a case where one of them is clearly... And that's what makes the fight so interesting. It's not the case that one of them has clearly a better record or one of them has clearly done more. They are the two best guys in the world, and we want to see them fight. And people are acting like Khabib's unbeatable because he's holding the belt, but frankly, it's still a toss-up between the two of them, and I've written this article 4 times now, but I'm still dying to see them in the cage together. As my favourite meme in MMA said, men only want one thing and it's fucking disgusting. It's just the poster for Tony versus Khabib. Please make that fight. I so badly want to see that fight. If Dustin wins, we're all sort of just forgetting about Dustin Poirier, but if Dustin wins, I think Tony should fight Dustin, obviously, but I still want to see him versus Khabib. And that's got to be, we worked out that Max Holloway is actually becoming a pay-per-view draw as featherweight champion. There was actually a surprising number of buys for his most recent fight, at featherweight at least. I think we can say that there's a good chance of a good number of buys based on people knowing who these two are. Even if you didn't have the McGregor bump, people know how good these guys are. But if you add in the McGregor bump and you say, look, the guy who beat McGregor is going to fight some other guy who's unbeaten, blah, 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 it's a stupid amount of money being left on the table doing this Dustin fight, to be honest. But then they are both so unreliable in getting to the event. Anyway, let's talk about Cejudo versus Marlon Moraes. This one was incredible because Marlon Moraes was looking like a motherfucker, Joe. He was looking like a motherfucker in the first round. Cejudo was clearly having trouble. Good kicking, good good punching, good counter punching. Like I said, Moraes' boxing has become incredible over recent years. Just like anything you throw at him, he comes back instantly with a counter. And he used the uppercut nicely because Cejudo is coming in behind his head again, and that will, you're not going. It's not like if someone's head is forward of their body and you smash them under the chin. But if their head is if their chin's tucked down and they're looking down, you can hit the front of their face, which isn't as bad, but it's still pretty bad for them. So uppercut against Nod is pretty good. Something that Henry was doing in the first round was throwing high kicks and then diving in behind his head to throw hooks. I quite like that. If you did that with a cross guard, I'd really like that. I don't like the idea of just smashing your head into someone offensively, not through any foul play, but just through damage to your own brain. But he's not having a good first round. Goes back to the corner. His coach, whoever's the one not with the glasses, actually did really well of just saying, look, we need this, this, and this done. You just need to do it. No fucking around. No, I think you got that round, champ, or whatever. I've seen some pretty bad. Well, it depends on your fighter. Some people just need to be lied to and pumped up to do better. But second round comes out, just puts it on Marlon. And the thing that really gets it going, or it might be in the third round that this really happens, but the thing that hurts Marlon and really starts the beginning of the end and changes the fight around, a right hand lead. And it took me back to watching Norman Mailer talk about the Rumble in the Jungle. Ali comes out, Foreman is this big terrifying ring cutter, very hard to actually scientifically box. What do you throw at him? The one thing that his sparring partners for $50 a day are not going to throw at him, a right hand lead. Because one, if you throw a right hand lead, you're putting yourself open to a counter. It's slower, and the opponent should be able to counter. Two, it's supposed to be like a massive insult to throw right-hand leads at a tremendous pro. And I felt like there was a little bit of that in there. Marlon Moraes has looked phenomenal countering people's jabs, countering people's low kicks, things like that. Henry Cejudo literally throws his right hand from his chest, like a karate punch, just throws it, hits him square on the chin, and that's Marlon almost gone for the fight. It's just right-hand lead after right-hand lead after that. And then every time that he sort of ducks in, Cejudo slaps on the double collar tie, works knees. Towards the end, he almost hits an anaconda choke. I thought he just looked phenomenal. Every element of his... Once he got his confidence, every element of his game looked amazing. And it wasn't just his confidence, obviously, he chinned him first. It's very tricky to get in on Marlon Moraes, but once he had his opening, he was just after it constantly. And I think this is... DJ's, we're doing comparisons to DJ again, but DJ's bantamweight run really wasn't amazing, given that he got a title shot. He beat Kid Yamamoto, who was already sort of well past it and in his losing streak. Then he fought Miguel Torres, who was on the way down, but Miguel Torres should have won that fight, and then he didn't win a round from Dominic Cruz. For Cejudo to go up and fight Marlon Moraes, who is as good as any bantamweight we've seen. I would love to see him versus TJ, or him versus Cody, if Cody's not just mental for that fight. If Cody's not just having brain farts all the time now, that'd be a good fight. But Marlon Moraes, if you look at him technically, as good as any bantamweight we've seen. Different challenges presented to, fighting Dominic Cruz, but a tremendous fighter. And for Henry Cejudo to go up and do that is absolutely incredible. He is the corniest man in MMA, but I think you've got to respect that. Just incredible performance. Oh my goodness, I've just looked at the time and we're actually running way over. I think we've covered all the important fights here. Give me a shout if I haven't. If you want to read my further thoughts on Valentina, I wrote a lengthy piece for the Patreon boys. And some other stuff in there too from the card that I just thought was fun. Get in on the Patreon, extra articles every week. Supports the podcast, allows me to do this. Head to thefightprimer.com to see whatever I'm writing at any given time. I will have something coming at Unibet this week on the boxing, I believe, as well. And we'll do something else for the Patreon boys as well. And if you want to send an email to the podcast, fightsgonepodcast@gmail.com. I will be back later in the week to chat to you, and we'll talk about this upcoming Bellator event with Rory McDonald versus Naaman Gracie, who is a very exciting young man. So, yeah, look forward to that. I'm your boy, Jack Slack. Jessica eyes right straight into stepping right hook over and over and over again. Bless.